Okay, so my clock says 5 o'clock. Let's call the Board of Adjustments to order. The first item we have on our meeting agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. I think that's from September, isn't it? Does that sound right? Have you guys had an opportunity to review those?
Move to approve.
We've got a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
We've got a second. We need to take roll on that.
Board Member Wool,
Yes.
Board Member Seifert,
Yes.
Board Member Wengler,
Yes.
Board Member Jansen,
Yes.
Chair Clark.
Yes. Okay, thank you. The motion carries on that. The second item we have is the single variance request that we have. If we could call on staff to present that.
Sure thing. Good evening, Chairwoman Clark, board members. Todd and Lois Ely are requesting approval of a variance from Section 140507 of the City Code of Ordinances, requirement for a building permit on their property for the reconstruction of 2 existing decks, one partially covered to their existing single-family home. Construction of the proposed decks are considered a building addition. The request is located south of Bismarck, south of 48th Avenue Southeast, between South Washington Street and 12th Street Southeast, along the south side of Meadowview Drive. It's south, if you were wondering. The property is not platted and is a meets and bounds description. According to records, the existing home was constructed in 1974. The property is considered a parcel of record, and it existed as a separate parcel prior to the city obtaining jurisdiction in this area. The city of Bismarck obtained extraterritorial jurisdiction and rezone the property along with the adjacent properties within Section 28 to rural residential in December of 1976. Permits have been issued for various improvement projects for this property since it was constructed, including building additions to enclose a pool, construct an attached garage, and construct an accessory building. The last permit of record was issued in 2004. According to records, the zoning ordinance was modified somewhere between 2004 and 2008 to add additional criteria for approval of a building permit for a property that is not platted. In this particular situation, the following criteria apply. The value of the addition does not exceed 25% of the assessed value of the building. Yes, that would be true. The value of the proposed deck does not exceed 25% of the assessed value of the single-family dwelling. The parcel of record meets the minimum lot area requirement for a zoning lot in the district in which the parcel is located. Yes, the property is 2.19 acres in size. The minimum area requirement for a property in the rural residential zoning district is 1.5 acres. The parcel of record has a principal frontage on a dedicated public right-of-way or on a permanent, exclusive, non-obstructed access easement to a dedicated right-of-way, not less than 20 feet wide. Yes, this property has access to Meadowview Drive, although not through the typical platting process to dedicate a right-of-way or an easement. You'll see in your packet, we were able to find some information, specifically that the Burleigh County Commission at their meeting on June 5th, 1973, took action to extend Meadowview Drive between lots 12 and 13, Block 2, to the southern edge of the plat, essentially providing access to this property. The County and Highway Department has confirmed that this extension is being maintained by their department and would be, I guess, considered a prescriptive roadway. The parcel of record is an auditor's lot or an aliquot description rather than a meets and bounds description. No, this property is not an auditor's lot or an aliquot description. It is described as a meets and bounds. If approved as proposed, the variance would allow the construction of 2 existing decks, the reconstruction of 2 existing decks on the parcel that is legally described as a meets and bounds description. Pursuant to Section 140602 of the City Code of Ordinances, the Board of Adjustment may vary or adjust the strict application of any of the requirements in the zoning ordinance in case of an exceptionally irregular, narrow, shallow, or steep lot or other exceptional physical or topographical condition, by reason of which the strict application of the provisions of the zoning ordinance would not result in an unnecessary hardship that would deprive the owner of reasonable use of land or building involved. No adjustment in the strict application of any provisions of the zoning ordinance shall be granted by this board unless it finds the following: that there are special circumstances or conditions that apply to the land or buildings that do not generally apply to land or buildings within the neighborhood and have not resulted from the act of the applicant. That the strict application of the provisions of the zoning ordinance would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of said land or building. The granting of the variance is necessary for the reasonable use of land or building, and that the variance as granted by the board is the minimum variance that would accomplish the relief sought by the applicant. That the grant of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. The applicant has submitted a written statement that identifies their anticipated hardship and explains why they believe the variance should be granted. The document was also included in your packet. Additionally, the public has been notified of this request. 63 letters were mailed to the owners of nearby properties on November 22nd. To my knowledge, we have not received inquiries or any comments for or against the request. If you choose to approve the variance as proposed, staff asks that you identify a hardship, modify the review standards or findings outlined into your staff report to support your decision. The applicant is here to answer any questions before they approach. Do you have questions of me? Go ahead.
Jenny, now, these are decks that were originally there and they tore down, they're gonna do it. Now, if someone builds or a house tears down or burns down, they have the footprint there. Doesn't this comply to the same kind of purpose, that it's gonna be in the same footprint or the same spot?
Sure. Board Member Seifert, Chair Clark, essentially, yes. If the ordinance provides criteria for if a home was to be burned down or a tornado or whatever, and it was considered a nonconformity or on like a non-platted lot, or there was some issue where a permit couldn't be permitted, they would be allowed to build under the same footprint or foundation. It's my understanding that the proposed decks are a little bit larger than existing today and with a new overhang.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to build on that, if it was the same footprint, we would still be here today, wouldn't we? If the deck they were constructing was the same footprint, we'd still be here today.
Chairwoman Clark, yes, a precedent has been set that we would be here today to get a permit because this is an addition to the property.
Okay. Any additional questions?
Yeah, I got a question for Jenny as well. Is this property eligible to be platted? Is there any reason that could not be done?
Board Member Wall, board members, this property could be platted. I'll note too in the criteria that are listed in the ordinance for approval, likely added around 2004, 2008. The platting process is a very large, extensive process. We all understand that. To alleviate some of that, those process requirements, the folks that had our position before us and previous auditors were comfortable with creating an auditor's lot, which is very similar to a plat of irregular description. You've seen those before, and built that into the ordinance somewhere between 2004 and 2008. However, as staff has changed and as new folks are in different positions, that interpretation is no longer permitted.
Okay, thank you.
Just so I'm clear on this, it appears since this property was purchased and built upon and so forth, the ordinance has changed, more criteria for that and so forth. So we're really asking the applicant to abide by the criteria today that's decades later and so forth. And we've issued permits prior to this and not had that criteria. So it's more of an implementation of how they implemented the ordinance at the time and whether they overlooked something or didn't enforce something and so forth. So we have an applicant that has between a rock and a hard place because these things have changed. They haven't changed anything, but the criteria has changed. So now they're in a spot that they can't do what they want to do because of all these changes to that ordinance.
Board Member Jansen, board members, that's a correct statement.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You stated that if they were building on the same footprint, we would still be here for this meeting? Or would, on the same footprint, would they be allowed to rebuild the same product?
I would have to double check that section of the ordinance for requirement of a building permit. I think because this property is described as a meets and bounds, it would have to be an auditor's plat or a formal subdivision plat. But if you don't mind, I can check that.
Well, and I guess it seems to me in our January meeting, we had the same type of thing. It was too small a lot. And I believe I asked the question then, if it burns down, could they rebuild? And the statement was they could on the same footprint.
That is correct. That is an existing home. So if the home was torn down, they could build on the same footprint. But any additions onto that home that would be larger than the existing footprint would have to go through that process, that variance process again.
But if they built the same decks they had, we would not be here.
Yes. Yes. I'm looking at the building official, and yes, that determination would be made during the permit review process.
That they could build the
If it was
exact same
exactly the
footprint.
same. It would be treated more as a maintenance issue.
Okay, so we wouldn't be here today if it were.
We would not if they were exactly the same. And uncovered.
Okay, so
So this is different in the fact that they are larger and a portion of one of them is partially covered.
okay.
It was not covered before.
From the aerial photo, it looks like there was a gazebo in its place. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's not an issue of meets and bounds as far as a description versus a platted lot, because that would be in our subdivisions. This was not in a subdivision, never has been, and so forth, so there's no determination between those two as far as a permit. It's just they're going larger, they're actually covering one, and so forth. Okay.
That's correct.
Any additional questions for staff? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take some testimony from our property owners. Is it Eiley? Ely. Ely? Ely? If one or both of you would like to come up and give us an overview of what's going on. And if you'd state your name for the record, please.
Sure. So I'm Lois Ely and my husband Todd Ely, for the record. So, yeah.
So tell us
guess-
how this evolved.
So I guess I guess we had projects around the house. We needed new roof and new siding, and the decks are aging. The deck in the back of our house that were going a little bit bigger on is, it was definitely getting to the point where it was unsafe. We had missing boards. We have a lot of turkeys, and they like to sit on our railing, and they busted our railing, and so we made the decision to tear down and rebuild and make sure that go away from wood and go to maintenance free. We had a gazebo that was not used very well, more for storage than anything, and so we wanted to be able to do something where it would be more usable, and so we came up with, instead of an octagonal design, we did a square design, which changed the footprint a little bit, and we readjusted because there's kind of like a deck and then an attached deck with a little walkway to it. And so we went ahead and kind of changed the structure, changing the stairs and all of that. So it changed it not by much, but it gave us a little bit more square footage. So apparently that's changing the the structure. But it's basically covering the same area as it was before. Like I said, a little bit different design. And you know, going through this process, we found out that we're not platted. It's like, we have learning a lot, I guess. Legal description for taxes, legal description for purchase of the property, legal description is there when they came through recently to try to put in a dike, you know, so everybody knows where the property lines are. This is nowhere near anybody's property line. We've gone through the process of verifying and making sure that there's no issues with flood, because we are in the floodplain area, and so that all checked out. So our last hurdle was the platting, and so with the changing of the siding, we did tear down the back deck, expecting, hey, you know, we're going to build a new deck, and unfortunately found out that we're, you know, have to adhere to the city of Bismarck because we're part of the ETA, and then found out, yeah, that we're not platted, so surprise. So the additions that were done before were prior to us owning the home
I was going to
and
ask, how
stuff.
long have you owned the property?
So we've owned it since 2012, so after the flood came through. So, yeah, so we're learning quite a bit about this process, I guess.
And
so-
did you make an attempt to go to the auditor to try to get a,
Yeah, I did. I contacted them, and they came back and said that they do not hand out auditors' lots for building permits, and which was a little confusing because the code says you need an auditor's lot, and they said they wouldn't grant it because it's just for tax purposes, which has nothing to do with building permits. And it's like, well, does that go against the code though? You know, so it seemed like apples and oranges to me. So we did, I've talked to a lot of people, so these guys know me well, and the county and engineers, and yeah, I've had a lot of phone calls just trying to figure this all out and stuff, but I appreciate Jenny's expertise and Ann's help and stuff, so everybody's been great to work with. So that, I guess that's where we're at. The hardship is right now, that back deck's gone. And off of our kitchen, you walk through, you know, our patio deck, and you've got a 5-foot fall.
the
And
landing's a little rough?
Yes, and so when we have company over, especially little ones, you know, it's dark out, there's no lights in the back, somebody could get injured. And so that's our concern right now, is getting our home safe, you know, for having people there, and, you know, and something happens, fire starts, you know, there could be anything. And so definitely our concern is getting the approval, you know, to move forward, and so that we can get the deck up and get our home safe again.
Okay, so as you've described your planned construction versus what you had in the past, is it accurate to say it's very similar?
Yeah.
Or is there, how much additional square footage is there on this new one, the new plan, approximately?
Oh, I don't know, it's under 100 feet, you know. It's, the octagon, it's probably at 14, maybe 12 foot wide.
And
now
you're
this
just
is a
replacing it with a
14
square.
With a
in that
square.
same spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, it was a bridge to it, and now it'll just be like hooked up to the
Yeah.
deck.
So it shifts it, you know, a couple feet this way, but it's similar if you know, it's not that much bigger, put it that way.
Go ahead.
So the other one did not have the overhang that you want to build on there now?
Well, it had a gazebo, which is covered, you know.
Which was covered,
So-
but this new overhang now, that's going to be like attached to the house and
No,
deck?
it's like a 14, like this is 14 by 14. It's just gonna come up and have a couple foot overhang, and then, you know, I'll put barbecues in there. And we'll just
Oh, so
If
it's not
it's
gonna be
raining a
off the
little
roof
bit-
overhang or anything
No,
like that?
it's a little 4 foot.
Oh, okay.
It's not even quite 4 foot, it's just deep enough for you and the
Gotcha.
barbecue.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
they-
And I think they're gonna hook up a pergola, which has,
Just the
it's
detached.
The
not
slots.
covered, but a little shading.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for the Ely?
Ely, very
Ely.
good, yes.
Ely. Go ahead.
I just have a question. So, you go back to the auditor's lot, and I understand that and so forth, but we have others out there that have meets and bounds as far as their property. They're not platted, because they were in a subdivision and so forth, and we've implemented all lots have to be platted now, and so forth, and that's typical in subdivisions, but this is way before that took place, that existed. So now you're fighting because, to plat it costs a lot of money.
Yes.
I know that for certain. And so then it becomes not advantageous for you to even do it because that cost is ridiculous. And so I think implementing that ordinance the way that was with meets and bounds and now with the lots having to be platted, that has created a hardship for anybody who has a meets and bounds
Right.
situation.
Well,
or wants to
one
do-
thing we need to be aware of as a board is in considering our factors, cost isn't a factor.
No, correct.
So as we look at this, if we are going to find a hardship, we need to look at our A, B, and
Yes.
C and determine whether it meets that requirement.
The other issue is plating takes time, a lot of
Sure.
time from what I understand. And so that again is, I mean, it would be one thing if we wouldn't have tore that deck down, but our expectation was, that we'd be putting up a safe deck, right. I mean, it should be built already, so that's, I guess our big concern.
I do appreciate you going through the process instead of not, because it's important to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Any additional questions from the board? Anything else that you want to add to that?
Just, I don't think we could have built it the way it was. It was built out of 2x6. And, I mean, it was so below code that I didn't even like going out there that much. It just had to come down. So, yeah, you couldn't build it the same because nobody would let you.
Yeah.
For good reason, too. 'Cause, yeah, it was dangerous.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we're to the part of the procedure where normally we'd ask if there's any comments from members of the public, but we don't have anyone down here right now. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the comment period on this variance request. And now the ball's in our court as a board to determine what decision to make. My request, when you make a motion, is to make sure you're using the language that's in the procedures and protocol document. Yes.
Sorry, building official Blaskowski. I would just wanted to clarify, I was looking into the ordinance to your question, Mr. Wangler, regarding the reconstructing something that's been damaged. They actually would not meet the criteria. That Jenny explained it correctly in the fact that if this has been damaged by fire or anything like that, they couldn't even rebuild this in the original footprint unless it met the criteria listed in that item 3 that she had mentioned. It is not a adequate description. It's a meets and bounds description. So that's the issue and why we're here today. Is it needs to meet that criteria, even if it were the same exact size. So.
Thanks for clarification. And as we move forward, in order to have committee discussion or board discussion on this, we need to have a motion before us.
I'd like to move to approve the variance based on the special circumstance being that this property was not a problem until the ETA extended out to their jurisdiction extended out to their property. The hardship being that not granting it prevents them from maintaining their property in a usable manner.
Okay, so that there are special circumstances based on ETA.
Right.
Strict application of the provision, would that deprive the applicant of reasonable use?
I believe so. They can't maintain their property in a safe.
And would the
safe condition.
granting of the variance be in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the zoning?
Yeah, I believe so, mainly because everything that would be required to do what they want to do would be allowed
Okay,
under the provision of the ordinance if it was platted.
okay.
So it really wouldn't be different than any of their neighbors.
So we've got a motion before us, finding A, B, and C. Do we have a
Second.
We've got a second. Okay, now we get to the point where we can have some board discussion on this. I think there are a lot of similarities between this and what we saw at our previous meeting.
Right. What I struggle
In the
with.
Ponderosa subdivision.
What I struggled with before making the motion was, we've always talked about physical characteristics of the lot being the main criteria we're looking for. That's not really what we've got here, but there are still special circumstances, which I think I described.
Right, and it sounds like the project that's being contemplated is an improvement to the property and and the safety,
Yeah.
right? Right, to not allow them to make it, that improvement would leave them in an unsafe situation. And it sounds like the construction of the project is very similar to what they've got today. They're not asking for a significantly larger footprint.
Right, yeah. If we were encroaching on property lines or setbacks, lot coverage, that kind of thing.
Which is what we usually find ourselves discussing,
Yeah,
isn't it?
which we're not talking about that, so obviously that's not an issue here.
Any additional discussion? Okay, we've got a motion and a second before us. Let's take the roll.
Board Member Jansen,
Yes.
Board Member Wool,
Yes.
Board Member Wengler,
Yes.
Board Member Seifert,
Yes.
Chair Clark.
Yes. Okay, so that motion carries. The variance has been granted. You've got a window of time in which you need to make that construction. If you find yourself bumping up on that, was that 12 months? 24? 24 months. If you find yourself bumping up on that, you need to come back and talk to staff, but I imagine you probably won't because you've got a big step. Thank you for coming before us. I don't think we've got anything else on our agenda today. That wraps it up. Our next meeting is, I think, the 2nd?
Yes,
of
Chairman Clark.
January.
It is January 2nd. We elected last year around this time not to move it, so we all will be at work that day. I don't know that we have any applications, so we might not have a meeting, but we'll let you know beforehand.
Okay, and I am, I think, the only member that's up for reappointment, so we will see if I'm reappointed and whether I'm here. Are you? Yeah, he was. Yep. So we'll see how that plays out. We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.